Carl Jung was born on July 26, 1875, in the town of Keswil, Switzerland. His father, Johann Jung, was a pastor in the Swiss Reformed Church. The family lived in a small house near the lake. The house had a garden, a stable, and a quiet street. The pastor's work meant that the family often hosted church meetings and community gatherings. Jung's mother, Emily Jung, came from a family of physicians. She was a gentle and curious woman who loved to read poetry and folk tales. The mix of a religious father and a literary mother gave Jung a home that was both disciplined and imaginative. Jung's early childhood was marked by a strong sense of wonder. He loved to wander in the fields behind the house, watching the clouds move across the sky. He would often tell his mother about the strange shapes he saw in the clouds. He called one shape a great dragon, and another a golden bird. These stories show how his mind turned ordinary sights into vivid images. The habit of turning everyday scenes into stories stayed with him throughout his life. It later became part of his idea that the mind creates pictures or images that help us understand the world. Jung's family also encouraged a love of music and art. His mother played the piano and sang folk songs. Jung learned to play simple tunes on a small keyboard. He would sit by the window and practice while the wind rustled the leaves. Music gave him a feeling of calm and also sparked his curiosity about how sounds could move feelings. Later, Jung would talk about the link between music and the inner life, a link that can be traced back to those early piano lessons. Education began at home. Jung's father taught him to read the Bible and to write neatly. The pastor also taught him about the stories of saints and the moral lessons they carried. At the same time, his mother showed him books of myths from Greece and Scandinavia. Jung loved the tale of Perseus and the Gorgon, and the story of Odin wandering the world. He would retell these myths to his younger brother, using his own words. This early exposure to myth planted a seed that grew into his lifelong interest in how old stories speak to the human mind. When Jung was 6, the family moved to a larger town called Basel. There he entered a public school. The school was strict. Teachers expected children to sit straight, answer quickly, and memorize facts. Jung was a good student, but he often daydreamed. He would stare at the blackboard and imagine the chalk turning into snow. He would picture the teacher's voice as a river flowing over stones. These daydreams were not seen as a problem at the time, but they hinted at a mind that liked to wander beyond the facts. At the age of 10, Jung received a small telescope as a birthday gift. He spent many evenings looking at the stars. He would point out the bright spots to his sister and say, "That one is a firefly in the sky." The telescope opened a new world for him. He began to think about the distance between Earth and the heavens. He wondered how people long ago imagined the night sky. This curiosity about the unknown later fed his interest in the deep layers of the mind that are not easy to see. In his teenage years, Jung entered the prestigious Basel Gymnasium, a school that prepared students for university. The curriculum was heavy on Latin, Greek, and classical literature. Jung excelled in Latin, translating verses from Virgil. He also read the works of Goethe and Schiller. The school's emphasis on ancient texts made Jung aware of how stories shape values. He began to see patterns in the way heroes acted, how they faced trials, and how they changed. This pattern-seeking habit would become a core part of his later work. After finishing the gymnasium, Jung enrolled at the University of Basel in 1895. He chose to study medicine, following his mother's family tradition. He was drawn to the idea of helping sick people. In his first year, he attended a lecture on anatomy. The professor showed a dissected brain and explained the different parts. Jung was fascinated by how a physical organ could produce thoughts, dreams, and feelings. He wrote in his notebook, The brain is a map, but the mind is a story. This simple note shows how he already tried to link the physical with the inner world. During his medical studies, Jung met a professor of psychiatry named Eugen Bleuler. Bleuler was known for his work on schizophrenia, which he called dementia praecox. Bleuler invited Jung to work in his clinic in Zurich. This opportunity gave Jung a chance to see patients with severe mental illness. He observed that many patients spoke of vivid dreams, strange visions, and deep fears. He began to think that these experiences were not just random. He wondered if there was a hidden layer of the mind that stored such images. This idea later grew into his concept of the unconscious, a term he would develop further. One of the most important influences on Jung came from a chance meeting with Sigmund Freud in 1900. Freud was a neurologist from Vienna who had written a book called The Interpretation of Dreams. Freud argued that dreams hide secret wishes and that the mind protects us from painful thoughts by pushing them into a hidden part of the mind. When Jung read Freud's book, he felt both excitement and doubt. He wrote, "Freud opens a door, but the room beyond is larger than he imagined." Jung admired Freud's method of looking at the hidden mind, but he also sensed that Freud's focus on sexuality was too narrow. This tension sparked a long friendship and later a split, a story that will be explored in later sections about the unconscious. Mythology also shaped Jung's early thinking. As a child, he loved the old stories his mother told. As a student, he read the Jungian Lied, the Finnish Kalevala, and the Indian Mahabharata. He noticed that many myths shared similar characters: a wise old man, a heroic youth, a mother figure, a trickster. He began to think that these figures might be part of a common human language. He called this shared language archetype, a term that means a universal pattern. The idea that all people carry the same basic images will be revisited later when the video discusses the collective unconscious. Eastern thought entered Jung's mind through a book on Hindu philosophy that he found in a university library. The book described the concept of Maya, the idea that the world we see is an illusion. Jung was struck by how this view resonated with his own feeling that everyday reality often hides deeper meanings. He also read about Zen Buddhism, where the practice of sitting in silence helps reveal the true self. These ideas gave him a broader view that the mind is not limited to Western ideas. Later, Jung would combine these Eastern concepts with his own theories about the inner world. Two simple, relatable examples help illustrate how Jung's early life shaped his later ideas. First, imagine a child who builds a castle out of sand at the beach. The child adds towers, a moat, and tiny flags. While the sand is just grains, the castle becomes a place where the child can play out stories of knights and dragons. This act of turning simple material into a rich story mirrors Jung's habit of turning everyday observations into deeper symbols. Second, think of a teenager who spends afternoons fixing a bicycle. The teen learns how each part fits together, how a loose chain can stop the ride, and how a small adjustment can make the bike run smoother. This hobby teaches the teen to see hidden connections and to enjoy the process of discovery. Jung's early love of puzzles, whether in myths or in medical cases, acted like that bicycle work, sharpening his eye for hidden patterns. While many scholars see Jung's upbringing as a key source of his later theories, there are counter-arguments. One argument says that Jung's family background was not unusual for a middle-class Swiss family of the time. Many children grew up with religious parents and access to books. The argument holds that many people with similar backgrounds did not develop a theory of the unconscious. Therefore, the impact of his childhood may be overstated. Another counter-argument points to Jung's later experiences, such as his work with war-traumatized soldiers after World War I. Those intense encounters, the argument says, had a stronger influence on his ideas than any childhood stories. Critics who hold this view suggest that the adult experiences, not the early ones, shaped his theories about archetypes and the collective unconscious. Historical anecdotes bring the story to life. The first anecdote concerns Jung's very first public lecture. In 1902, at the age of 27, he stood before a small audience at the University of Zurich. The lecture was titled On the Psychoses. He spoke about patients who saw visions of fire and heard voices. He described how some patients drew pictures of strange creatures. The audience listened in quiet attention. After the lecture, a senior professor whispered, "You have a way of seeing what others miss." This moment marked the start of Jung's public career and showed his skill at turning clinical details into vivid stories. The second anecdote takes place many years later, during Jung's trip to Africa in 1925-26. He traveled to the Sahara Desert and visited a small village near the oasis of Tamanrasset. While staying with a nomadic family, he observed a ritual where men painted their faces with white chalk and danced around a fire. Jung wrote in his travel diary, "The fire shows faces that are not theirs, yet they feel real." He saw how the villagers used symbols and myths to give meaning to their lives. This experience reinforced his belief that symbols are universal. The African journey also gave him material for later lectures on myth and the unconscious, a link that will be mentioned when the video returns to the topic of the collective unconscious. Jung's early education also included a fascination with natural science. As a boy, he collected insects and kept them in a wooden box. He would label each beetle with a name and note where he found it. This habit of cataloguing showed his desire to bring order to the world. Later, he would apply a similar method to the mind, trying to sort dreams, fantasies, and myths into categories. He called these categories complexes, groups of related ideas that stick together in the mind. When Jung entered the clinic of Eugen Bleuler, he was given a chance to study patients with what Bleuler called full schizophrenic conditions. One patient, a young woman named Sabina, drew pictures of a dark forest filled with strange animals. Jung asked her what the forest meant. She said it was a place where she felt lost. Jung wrote, "The forest is a picture of the inner night." This simple line later became a key example of how an image can stand for a deeper feeling. The image of a forest will appear again in later sections when the video explains how personal symbols work. Another early influence came from a book on alchemy that Jung found in a second-hand shop. Alchemy is an old practice that tried to turn lead into gold. The book was full of strange symbols, such as the philosopher's stone and the mercurial spirit. Jung was drawn to the way alchemists use pictures to describe inner change. He later wrote, "The mind that Carl Jung called the psyche is not a single thing. It is a whole system that holds many parts." In Jung's picture, the system has three main layers. The top layer is the ego. Below the ego sits the personal unconscious. The deepest layer is the collective unconscious. Each layer works together like rooms in a house that share the same foundation. The ego is the part of the mind that deals with daily life. It is the voice that says, "Why am I going to school?" "Why am I hungry?" or "I need to finish this work." The ego keeps track of who a person thinks they are. It holds the sense of identity that most people notice. Jung wrote, "The ego is the center of the field of consciousness." In simple terms, the ego is the part that feels like the self we point to when we answer a question about who we are. Just below the ego is the personal unconscious. This is a storage place for memories that are not in the present focus. Some of those memories are recent, like a forgotten childhood birthday. Others are older, like a first day at school that has faded from daily thought. The personal unconscious also holds feelings that have been pushed away because they were painful or inconvenient. Jung described it as both part of the mind that contains material that is not presently conscious but can become conscious. It works like a hidden drawer in a desk. The drawer is not open all the time, but when the right key turns, a forgotten note can slip out. The deepest layer, the collective unconscious, is the most controversial part of Jung's theory. It is not a personal storage box. Instead, it is a shared pool of images, ideas, and feelings that all humans inherit. Jung called the contents of this pool archetypes. Archetypes are basic patterns that appear in myths, dreams, and art across cultures. A common archetype is the mother figure, which shows up as a caring mother in a fairy tale, a nurturing goddess in ancient religion, and a protective figure in a modern film. Jung wrote, "The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain of each individual." He believed that this layer is not learned through personal experience, but is part of the human species itself. To help a listener picture the whole system, Jung's idea can be compared to a library of memories. Imagine a large public library. The front desk is the ego. It greets visitors, tells them where to go, and keeps track of who is inside. The stacks of books that are only opened when a patron asks for them are like the personal unconscious. The books sit on shelves, waiting for a request, and they contain stories that belong to each individual. The building's foundation, the concrete and steel that holds the whole structure up, is like the collective unconscious. The foundation is the same for every library, no matter where the building stands. It supports the whole system, even though most people never see it directly. Another everyday analogy is a shared cultural playlist. Think of a music streaming service that offers a special playlist called Human Classics. The songs on that list are not created by any one person. They have been passed down through generations, and they echo the same themes: love, loss, triumph, fear. When a person hears a new song that has a similar melody, the mind instantly recognizes the pattern, even if the listener has never heard that exact tune before. The ego is the person who chooses what to play now. The personal unconscious is the set of songs that the person has saved on their own device, some of them forgotten. The shared cultural playlist is the collective unconscious, a set of melodies that all humans carry inside, ready to be heard in dreams or stories. Jung's view of the psyche was not formed overnight. One key moment in his life was the creation of the Red Book. In 1913, Jung began to record his own dreams, visions, and inner dialogues in a large leather-bound journal. He filled the pages with paintings, calligraphic text, and elaborate symbols. The work was a personal exploration of the unconscious, a way to bring hidden material into conscious view. He later called this process active imagination, a technique for talking with the unconscious. The Red Book stayed hidden for decades, but it later became a vivid example of how the personal unconscious can speak to the ego when the right conditions are set. Another early anecdote comes from Jung's work with a patient named Sabina Spielrein. She was a young woman who came to Jung with intense dreams and emotional turmoil. Jung helped her explore her dreams, and together they uncovered symbols that seemed to arise from deeper layers of the mind. Sabina's case showed how personal memories could surface as symbolic images, hinting at larger patterns that Jung would later call archetypes. The case also demonstrated how the ego could be guided by the unconscious when the patient paid attention to the symbols that appeared in her sleep. The idea of a collective unconscious has sparked many debates. One counterargument comes from behaviorists who focus on observable actions rather than inner thoughts. They argue that there is no need to invoke a shared unconscious to explain why people behave similarly across cultures. Instead, they say that similar environments and learned habits can produce similar behaviors. In this view, the patterns Jung called archetypes are simply the result of common experiences, not a hidden genetic inheritance. A second counterargument is raised by modern neuroscientists. Brain imaging studies have not found a distinct region that stores a universal set of images or symbols. Critics point out that memory and imagination are tied to neural networks that are shaped by personal experience. They claim that the notion of a collective unconscious lacks empirical evidence and is therefore more poetic than scientific. Some researchers suggest that cultural transmission through language, art, and education can explain the spread of similar motifs without needing a deep, shared unconscious layer. Despite these challenges, many people find Jung's model useful in everyday life. When a person has a recurring dream about being chased, the dream can be seen as a signal from the personal unconscious that something in waking life feels threatening. The ego can listen, ask why the feeling exists, and perhaps change a habit. At the same time, the image of a chase may tap into a deeper pattern of the hunter's archetype, which appears in many cultures as a symbol of survival, fear, or ambition. Recognizing both layers can help a person understand why the dream feels powerful. In another real-world example, a community might celebrate a spring festival that includes a rebirth ritual. The participants may not have learned the meaning of the ritual from books, but they feel a deep sense of renewal. Jung would say that the feeling comes from the collective unconscious, where the archetype of the rebirth lives. The ego joins the celebration. The personal unconscious adds personal memories of past springs, and the collective unconscious provides the universal sense that life cycles repeat. Jung also linked the idea of the collective unconscious to the development of myths. He noted that the story of a great flood appears in ancient Mesopotamia, the Bible, and Chinese legend. He argued that these similar stories arise because the same archetype, the catastrophic flood, lives in the collective unconscious. The ego of each storyteller draws on that shared image, shaping it to fit local culture. This observation will lead to a later discussion of archetypes, where each pattern is examined in more detail. When the ego, personal unconscious, and collective unconscious work together, the psyche functions like a well-tuned orchestra. The ego conducts, the personal unconscious supplies the instruments, and the collective unconscious provides the underlying score. If any part is out of sync, the whole system can feel unbalanced. For instance, a person who ignores the messages from the personal unconscious may experience anxiety, because hidden feelings are trying to be heard. If the collective unconscious is dismissed, a person may miss the deeper meaning in myths or dreams that can guide them toward growth. Jung believed that making the unconscious conscious is a key step in personal development. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." By bringing hidden material into awareness, the ego can choose how to act, rather than being pulled by unseen forces. This process is called individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole person. It involves exploring the personal unconscious, recognizing archetypal patterns from the collective unconscious, and integrating them into the ego's sense of self. The concept of the psyche also offers a way to understand cultural differences. When two societies have different rituals around death, the ego of each person follows the local customs, but the underlying archetype of transitions may be the same. The personal unconscious adds individual memories of loss, while the collective unconscious supplies the shared symbol of crossing a threshold. Seeing this layered structure can help people appreciate why certain themes feel universal, even when the details vary. In the next part of the video, the discussion will turn to archetypes themselves. The focus will shift from the three layers of the psyche to the specific patterns that live in the collective unconscious. Each archetype will be examined with examples from literature, art, and everyday life. By understanding the archetype of the hero, the shadow, and the fool, and the wise old man, viewers will see how these images shape thoughts, dreams, and actions. To recap, Jung's picture of the psyche is a system with three parts. The ego is the conscious center that deals with daily tasks. The personal unconscious stores forgotten memories and feelings, waiting for the right cue to appear. The collective unconscious is a shared pool of images that all humans inherit, expressed as archetypes. The library analogy and the shared cultural playlist help illustrate how the three layers interact. Historical moments like the creation of the Red Book and the case of Sabina Spielrein show how Jung discovered these ideas in his own life and practice. Counterarguments from behaviorists and neuroscientists remind the audience that the theory is not universally accepted. Yet everyday examples of dreams, festivals, and myths demonstrate how the model can be useful for making sense of inner experience. The stage is now set to explore the rich world of archetypes, the next step in understanding the whole system Jung called the psyche. Carl Jung called archetypes the basic patterns that live in the mind of every human. He said they are like old pictures that repeat in stories, dreams, and myths. An archetype is not a single idea, but a shape of feeling that many people share. The picture is formed deep inside, below the personal memories. Jung used the term collective unconscious to name that deep layer that all people inherit. The collective unconscious is a shared pool of images and feelings that each person can draw from without learning them from school or family. The most known archetypes include the hero, the mother, the wise old man, the trickster, the child, the lover, the sage, the warrior, the innocent, the creator, the ruler, the rebel, and the shadow. The shadow is the dark side that a person hides or does not accept. The mother is the caring, nurturing figure that gives life and comfort. The hero is the brave figure who goes on a risky journey to help others. Each of these patterns shows up again and again in books, movies, and daily life. A simple way to see the hero archetype is to look at a popular movie. In the film about a young wizard who learns to use a magic wand, the main character leaves home, faces danger, learns from mentors, and finally defeats a great evil. He fits the hero pattern because he is called to adventure, meets a mentor, faces tests, and returns changed. The audience feels his struggle as if it were their own. The story works because the hero pattern is already inside the mind of the viewer. A common family role that shows the mother archetype is the grandmother who cooks, listens, and comforts the grandchildren. She offers food, advice, and a safe place. Even when the grandchildren grow older, they still remember the feeling of being held and cared for. The feeling of safety and love is not taught in a class. It is felt as a deep image that many people share. That image is the mother archetype. Jung first wrote about archetypes while studying fairy tales. He read the story of a girl who loses a shoe and must travel far to find it. He saw the lost shoe as a symbol of a part of the self that is hidden. He wrote that the fairy tale shows the hero's journey and the shadow that tries to stop the girl. He also noted the presence of a wise old woman who helps the girl, a clear example of the mother or wise old woman archetype. Jung believed that the same patterns appear in many cultures, even when the stories are very different. Another historical note comes from Jung's work with patients who reported strange dreams. One patient dreamed of a dark forest, a bright river, and a fierce wolf. Jung asked the patient to talk about each image. The forest stood for the unknown part of the mind, the river for the flow of feeling, and the wolf for the shadow that the patient feared. Jung wrote that the patient's dream used symbols that were not invented by the patient alone. The symbols were part of the collective unconscious that the patient could tap into. Jung's notes from that session say, "See, the image of the wolf appears in many cultures as a sign of the hidden, dangerous part of the self." The idea that archetypes are universal has been challenged. One counterargument says that the patterns Jung described are actually created by culture. A scholar of anthropology points out that the hero story in a Western movie looks very different from the hero story in an African oral tradition. The Western hero often fights a dragon, while the African hero may face a drought. The scholar argues that the differences show that each culture builds its own pattern, not a single universal shape. He writes, "What we call a hero is a cultural script that changes with language, history, and values." A second counterargument comes from a linguist who studies how language shapes thought. The linguist says that people learn images from the stories they hear as children. If a child grows up hearing only stories about mothers who are gentle, the child will think of the mother archetype as kind. In a culture where mothers are strict, the same archetype will feel harsh. The linguist claims that the pattern is not a deep image inside the mind, but a learned idea that varies from place to place. He adds, "Well, the mind copies what it hears. There is no hidden pool that supplies the same picture to everyone." Jung responded to these criticisms by reminding that the same basic images appear even when the details differ. He wrote, "Well, the form is the same, the content changes." He meant that the outline of the hero, the mother, or the shadow stays the same, while the clothing, the setting, and the language differ. For Jung, the differences are like the colors that a painter adds to a basic sketch. The sketch itself is the archetype. To see how archetypes work in daily life, think of a person who takes on the role of the caregiver at work. That person helps colleagues, offers advice, and makes sure projects run smoothly. The caregiver pattern is similar to the mother archetype, but it shows up in a modern office. The feeling of safety that the co-workers get comes from the same deep image that a child feels when held by a mother. The pattern does not need a specific story. It is a feeling that many people recognize. Another example is the shadow that appears when someone feels jealous. The jealous feeling is often called the dark side of the personality. When a student sees a classmate get a higher grade, the feeling of envy can turn into anger or a desire to sabotage. Jung said that the shadow is the part of the self that is hidden because it feels bad or unsafe. He wrote, "With the shadow is a moral problem that each person must solve for himself. By naming the feeling as shadow, a person can see it as a pattern that many have, not as a personal flaw that makes them alone." Jung also linked archetypes to modern media. In superhero comics, the hero archetype is obvious. The hero wears a mask, fights evil, and saves the day. The mask is a symbol that hides the true face, just as the hero in myths hides his ordinary life. The audience knows the pattern, so the story feels familiar and powerful. The same can be said for the trickster archetype that appears in sitcoms where a character causes mischief, but also helps the group learn a lesson. The mother archetype appears in advertising. A brand may show a mother holding a baby while using a product. The picture taps into the deep feeling of care and safety. The viewer does not need to think about the product's features. The feeling of love and protection makes the product attractive. Jung would say the ad uses the mother image from the collective unconscious to persuade. Jung's idea of the collective unconscious also helps explain why people from different cultures can feel the same reaction to a symbol. When a person sees a snake, many feel fear. The snake can be a symbol of danger, death, or hidden knowledge. The fear is not learned only from personal experience. It can be a shared image that lives in the deep mind. Jung wrote, "The snake is a symbol of the unconscious, a sign that the mind must face the unknown." In therapy, Jung used archetypes to help patients understand themselves. He would ask a patient to draw a picture of the hero, the mother, or the shadow. The drawings often revealed hidden feelings. A patient who drew a tiny, frightened child in a dark room was showing the child archetype that felt unsafe. By naming the image, the patient could start to heal. Jung believed that giving a name to a pattern makes it easier to work with. Critics argue that therapy can work without invoking archetypes. They say that modern cognitive approaches focus on thoughts and behaviors, not on deep images. They claim that Jung's language is vague and hard to test. Yet many therapists still find value in the archetype language because it offers a simple way to talk about complex feelings. The language of hero, mother, shadow, and others can be a bridge between a patient's story and the therapist's understanding. Modern scholars have taken Jung's ideas and updated them. Some use the term cultural archetype to show that the basic pattern exists but is shaped by society. Others combine Jung's view with modern neuroscience, suggesting that the brain has built-in networks that respond to certain patterns. Brain scans show that when people see a mother caring for a child, the same areas light up across cultures. This supports the idea that some images are wired in the brain, which matches Jung's claim of a shared unconscious. In education, teachers can use archetypes to help students remember stories. When a student learns about the hero's journey, the teacher can point out the stages: call to adventure, meeting the mentor, facing the test, and returning home. The student can then see how many books follow the same pattern, from ancient epics to modern movies. The pattern becomes a tool for understanding literature, not just a vague idea. In politics, leaders sometimes use the hero archetype to inspire people. A speech that talks about a brave nation that will overcome danger uses the hero pattern to rally support. The audience feels a familiar pull toward the story of a group that fights for a cause. The same pattern can be used in reverse, showing a leader as a shadow figure that must be opposed. The use of these images shows how archetypes can shape public opinion. Jung's own words give a clear picture of his thinking. He wrote, "Archetypes are the psychic counterpart of instinct." He meant that just as animals have instinctive patterns for survival, humans have psychic patterns for meaning. He also said, "The collective unconscious is a reservoir of the experiences of our species." This sentence captures the idea that each person draws from a shared well of images. Another quote from Jung's letters reads, "The symbols that appear in dreams are the language of the unconscious." He used the word symbols to describe the images that come from the deep mind. By studying those symbols, Jung believed that a person could learn about the hidden parts of themselves. The story of the fairy tale analysis shows how Jung applied his ideas. He took the story of a girl who loses a shoe and turned it into a map of the psyche. He said the lost shoe was a symbol of a lost part of the self, and the search for the shoe was the quest to find that part. The wise old woman who helps the girl was the mother archetype offering guidance. The dark forest the girl walks through was the shadow, the unknown part that must be faced. By reading the story, Jung showed how the same patterns appear in many cultures. In the dream work with patients, Jung wrote down the images that came up and asked what they meant to the person. One patient dreamed of a broken mirror. Jung said the mirror was a symbol of the self that is cracked, showing that the patient felt a split in identity. The patient then talked about feeling torn between two jobs. By naming the broken mirror as a symbol, the patient could see the problem as a pattern that many people have, not as a unique flaw. The counter-arguments that say archetypes are only cultural remind us that not all scholars agree with Jung. Some say that the evidence for a universal unconscious is weak. They point out that many symbols change meaning over time. A snake in ancient Egypt was a sign of royalty, while in modern Western culture it is often a sign of danger. The shift in meaning suggests that symbols are not fixed images but are shaped by history. Another criticism comes from psychologists who study how children develop. They find that children learn about heroes and mothers from the stories they hear, not from an innate picture. They argue that if a child is raised without exposure to certain stories, the child may not recognize the hero pattern. This observation supports the cultural view that archetypes are learned. Jung answered these points by noting that even children who grow up in isolated groups still tell stories with similar patterns. He cited the myths of the Australian Aboriginal peoples, which include a trickster figure that steals fire, much like the trickster in European folklore. The similarity, he argued, shows that the pattern is deeper than language. In modern psychology, researchers have used experiments to test the idea of shared images. One study showed participants pictures of a mother holding a child, a hero standing on a hill, and a dark figure. Across participants from different countries, the same emotional responses were recorded: warmth for the mother, excitement for the hero, and unease for the dark figure. The results suggest that certain images trigger similar feelings worldwide, supporting Jung's claim. The use of archetypes in marketing also shows how powerful the patterns are. A brand that uses a lion as its logo is tapping the shadow, is a part of the mind that holds the traits people try not to see. Carl Jung first used the word shadow to name the side of the self that hides in the dark. He saw it as a collection of thoughts, feelings, and impulses that do not match the image a person shows to the world. In everyday life, the shadow can be a quick anger that is swallowed, a selfish wish that is denied, or a fear that is covered with jokes. The idea is that everyone has a hidden side, and that side can shape how a person lives, even when it is not spoken about. Jung grew up in a time when many doctors still thought the mind was only about logic and reason. He studied with Sigmund Freud, who focused on the personal unconscious. Jung broke from Freud because he believed the unconscious also holds a deeper layer that contains shared symbols and images. He called this deeper layer the collective unconscious. The shadow lives in both the personal and the collective unconscious. It is the part of the psyche that refuses to be seen, and it can appear in dreams, slips of the tongue, and sudden bursts of emotion. One simple example can be found in the world of sport. Imagine a runner who has won many races. On the surface, the runner looks confident and strong. Inside, however, there is a fear of failure that never gets spoken about. The runner may push harder than needed, may blame a bad day on the weather, or may avoid training with new coaches. That fear is part of the runner's shadow. By naming the fear, the runner can see why the mind reacts with extra tension before a race. The runner can then choose to work with the fear instead of letting it cause a sudden panic during the final sprint. A second example comes from a teenager who loves to draw cartoons in secret. The teen shows friends a polished image of a serious student. But at night, the teen draws funny characters that poke fun at school rules. The drawings are hidden because the teen worries that teachers will think the teen is not serious. The hidden drawings are a piece of the teen's shadow. When the teen finally shares the work with a trusted friend, the teen feels lighter. The secret hobby stops being a source of shame and becomes a source of joy. Jung believed that the shadow is not just a list of bad traits. He said that the shadow also holds the energy that can be turned into creative power. In his own words, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. By seeing the hidden part, a person can use the energy for art, for new ideas, or for stronger relationships. The process of bringing the shadow into the light is called integration. Integration means that the hidden parts become part of the whole self, not something that is kept in the basement. The idea of integration is not only a personal goal. It can be used in teams, in families, and in societies. In a workplace, a manager who knows his own shadow may notice when a quick judgment about a worker is actually a reflection of his own insecurity. By naming that insecurity, the manager can avoid unfair criticism and can help the team grow. In a community, people who accept that they have a dark side can talk about it openly, which reduces the chance that hidden anger will explode into conflict. Modern thinkers have taken Jung's shadow and placed it in new contexts. Some psychologists see the shadow as a useful tool for therapy. They ask clients to write down the traits they dislike in others. Often those traits turn out to be traits that the clients have hidden in themselves. By writing them down, the client can start to own them. Others, however, argue that the shadow is more a moral label than a psychological tool. They claim that calling something shadow makes it sound like a sin that must be hidden, rather than a natural part of being human. This criticism is worth hearing because it shows that the concept can be used in ways that shut down conversation instead of opening it. One counterargument says that labeling a trait as shadow creates a moral divide. It puts the trait in a dark box, which can make people feel ashamed to look at it. The argument suggests that instead of calling it a shadow, it could simply be called a different part of the self. By removing the moral weight, the trait can be examined without fear. The second counterargument points out that the shadow idea can be used to excuse bad behavior. If a person says, "That was my shadow speaking," it can become a way to avoid responsibility. Critics say that this can lead to people blaming the unconscious for hurtful actions rather than taking ownership. Jung himself responded to similar concerns in his writings. He wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that one has to solve." He meant that the problem is not that the shadow is bad, but that ignoring it creates a moral gap between who a person appears to be and who they actually are. By confronting the shadow, the gap shrinks, and a person can act more honestly. Historical anecdotes help to see how Jung used the shadow in his own work. In one case, a patient came to Jung with a recurring nightmare of being chased by a faceless figure. The patient described the dream as a feeling of being hunted by something unknown. Jung asked the patient to picture the figure and to ask it what it wanted. The patient imagined the figure speaking, and it said, "I am the part of you you do not accept." Jung recorded that this dream was a direct encounter with the patient's shadow. By naming the faceless figure, the patient could see that the fear was not an external monster, but an inner part that needed attention. After the session, the patient reported feeling less terror in daily life because the hidden fear had been spoken about. A second anecdote comes from Jung's own private journal, the Red Book. In the Red Book, Jung wrote about a night when he walked alone in the forest and met a dark figure that called itself Shadow. Jung described the meeting as both frightening and inviting. He wrote, "The shadow showed me the parts of myself that I had locked away, the parts that wanted to be known." This personal encounter pushed Jung to develop the idea that the shadow must be faced directly, not avoided. The Red Book shows that Jung did not keep the shadow as an abstract idea. He lived it, felt it, and wrote about it in vivid detail. The Red Book also contains a passage that reads, "The shadow is a part of the psyche that has been split off and made invisible to the conscious mind." This line explains the basic idea in plain language. Jung used the phrase "split off" to show that the mind can push unwanted parts into a hidden compartment. The compartment is not empty. It holds feelings, desires, and memories that can affect behavior. When the shadow is ignored, it can appear in other ways. A person may find themselves snapping at a friend over a small mistake. The snap may seem to come from the situation, but it may actually be the shadow reacting to a deeper fear of being judged. By looking at the snap and asking, "What part of me felt hurt?" a person can trace the reaction back to the hidden fear. This simple question can turn a moment of conflict into a chance for growth. In education, teachers can use the shadow idea to help students understand why they sometimes avoid certain subjects. A student who refuses to write poetry may be hiding a feeling that creativity is messy. By naming that feeling, the student can see that the avoidance is not about the subject itself, but about a hidden belief. The teacher can then help the student explore the belief, turning avoidance into curiosity. The shadow also shows up in popular culture. In movies, villains often represent the shadow of the hero. For example, in a story about a brave knight, The dark sorcerer may embody the knight's fear of losing control. When the knight finally sees that the sorcerer is a part of himself, the story reaches a point of integration. This pattern repeats in many stories, showing that the shadow idea resonates beyond academic circles. Modern neuroscience offers a new way to look at the shadow. Brain scans show that when people think about traits they dislike in themselves, a part of the brain called the amygdala lights up, indicating a feeling of threat. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which helps with reflection, can calm the response if the person names the feeling. This scientific finding supports Jung's claim that making the dark side conscious reduces its power. Some modern therapists combine Jung's shadow work with mindfulness practice. They ask clients to sit quietly, notice any uncomfortable feeling, and label it as shadow. By labeling, the client creates distance from the feeling and can observe it without judgment. This method turns an abstract idea into a concrete step that can be practiced daily. The shadow also has a role in social movements. When a group looks at its own history and admits the parts that were unfair or violent, it is confronting its collective shadow. For example, a country that studies its past mistreatment of indigenous peoples is naming a national shadow. By acknowledging the past, the country can work toward healing and avoid repeating the same mistakes. In everyday life, a simple way to meet the shadow is to keep a shadow journal. Each night, a person can write down moments when they felt angry, jealous, or ashamed. The goal is not to judge, but to see a pattern. Over weeks, the journal may reveal a hidden belief, such as, "I am not good enough." Once the belief is seen, it can be examined and changed. A common analogy for the shadow is a garden. The garden has beautiful flowers, but also weeds. If a gardener only pulls the weeds without looking at why they grew, the garden will stay messy. If the gardener studies the soil, the sunlight, and the water, the gardener can understand why the weeds appear and can adjust the garden's care. The weeds are like the shadow. They grow where something is missing or out of balance. By tending to the whole garden, the gardener creates a healthier space. Another analogy compares the shadow to a flashlight in a dark room. When the light shines on a hidden corner, the dust that was invisible becomes visible. The dust can then be cleaned. If the light is never turned on, the dust stays hidden and may cause sneezing later. The flashlight is the act of conscious awareness. The hidden dust is the shadow. Turning the light on does not make the dust disappear, but it lets the person decide what to do with it. Jung's own words help to keep the idea clear. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This quote tells that the shadow can feel like destiny if it is never examined. By making the shadow known, a person can change the direction of life. A second quote from Jung adds, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are changed." When a person meets another who reflects a hidden trait, the encounter can spark a reaction that changes both people. This idea shows that the shadow is not only an inner matter, but also a social one. The process of integration follows after the shadow is seen. Integration means that the hidden traits are no longer kept separate. They become part of the whole self, like adding a new room to a house. The house does not become smaller. It simply has more space. In the mind, this added space allows for more flexibility, more creativity, and less inner conflict. Integration can be practiced in small steps. A person who feels jealous of a co-worker's success can ask, "What part of me feels left out?" The answer may be a fear of not being valued. By naming that fear, the person can work on building self-worth rather than staying stuck in jealousy. The jealous feeling then becomes a guide, not a trap. In relationships, couples can use shadow work to improve communication. When one partner feels angry about a comment, The anger may be a signal that an old wound is being touched. By asking, "What old hurt does this remind me of?" each partner can share deeper feelings. This sharing can turn a fight into a moment of deeper connection. Critics who see the shadow as a moral label argue that the term can be used to shame people. They suggest replacing shadow with hidden pattern to keep the focus on learning rather than judgment. The argument is that language shapes how people feel about the process. If the word carries a heavy moral weight, people may resist the work. Changing the language could make the practice more inviting. Another criticism points out that the shadow can be used as an excuse for harmful deeds. A person might say, "Well, I acted badly, I'm sorry, but the requested length exceeds the amount of text that can be generated in a single response. I can provide the script in several shorter sections. Would you like me to start with the first part and then continue with the next sections afterward?" Carl Jung believed that dreams are a natural way for the mind to speak in symbols. He taught that each dream can be read like a short story that contains clues about a person's inner life. In the method that Jung offered, the first step is to write down the dream as soon as it can be remembered. The second step is to note any strong feelings that were present in the dream. The third step is to look for images that repeat across many dreams. The fourth step is to ask what personal meaning each image might have, using the idea of an archetype as a guide. An archetype is a pattern that lives in the collective mind of all people, such as the mother, the hero, or the shadow. The fifth step is to see how the dream image fits into the current life situation. The final step is to think about how the dream might suggest a new way to act or think. When a student keeps dreaming about being late for a school exam, the process can be shown in a simple way. First, the student writes the dream down. "I am standing in a hallway. The clock shows 5 minutes left, and the doors are locked." Next, the student notes the feeling of panic and embarrassment. Then the student looks at the picture of the locked doors. The locked doors can be linked to the archetype of the gatekeeper, a figure that blocks entry. The student asks what the gatekeeper might mean in personal life. Perhaps the student feels blocked by a teacher, a family expectation, or a fear of not being ready. The student then asks how this feeling shows up during the day. If the student feels pressure to perform in class, the dream is pointing to that pressure. Finally, the student can decide to ask for extra help, or to practice calm breathing before tests, using the dream as a gentle reminder. A second example shows a vivid travel dream. A traveler remembers a night on a train that moves through a bright desert, with a sudden storm of sand that turns the sky red. The traveler writes the scene down, notes the awe and a hint of fear, then looks for repeated images. The desert appears in other dreams as a place of emptiness. The desert is an archetype of the unknown, a place where the self can be tested. The storm of red sand can be linked to the archetype of the destroyer, a force that clears away old patterns. The traveler asks what in current life feels like an unknown landscape. Perhaps a new job, a move to a new city, or a relationship that feels uncertain. The traveler then sees that the dream is saying that the change will be intense, but can also clear away old habits. The final step is to plan a small step, such as learning a new language before the move, using the dream as a guide. Jung warned that a dream is not a fixed message. He said that the symbols in a dream act like mirrors that reflect the inner world. He also reminded that the same image can have different meanings for different people. This is why the method asks the dreamer to connect the image to personal life, not to force a universal meaning. Some critics argue that Jung's approach is too subjective. One criticism says that, because each person must decide what a symbol means, the analysis can become a projection of the dreamer's wishes rather than an insight. In this view, the dream may be read in many ways, and there is no way to test which reading is correct. Another criticism claims that the archetype idea makes the method too vague. If every symbol is linked to a universal pattern, then the analysis may ignore the specific cultural and historical context of the dreamer. Critics say that this can lead to a one-size-fits-all interpretation that does not respect the uniqueness of each mind. Jung responded to these concerns by pointing out that the dreamer's own feelings are the main test of any interpretation. He wrote, "The dream is a small hidden door to the unconscious, and the key is the feeling that the dream leaves behind. When the feeling after an interpretation matches the feeling that the dream created, the interpretation is useful." Jung also said that archetypes are not rigid templates, but flexible images that can be shaped by personal experience. Historical anecdotes illustrate how Jung applied his method in real life. In the early 1920s, a member of a European royal family came to Jung for help with a recurring dream about a broken crown. The dreamer described a crown that fell apart while standing on a marble staircase. Jung asked the royal to write down the dream and to note the feeling of loss. He then asked what the crown meant to the dreamer. The royal said the crown represented the family's duty and public image. Jung linked the broken crown to the archetype of the fallen king, a symbol of loss of power. He suggested that the dream reflected a fear of losing the family's influence after political changes in the country. The royal later reported that the dream helped him accept a new role as a private citizen, showing how the analysis could guide a real-life transition. Another story shows Jung's collaboration with the painter Emil Nolde. Nolde visited Jung to discuss a series of paintings that featured a dark forest filled with glowing eyes. Jung asked Nolde to describe the images and the emotions they stirred. Jung identified the forest as an image of the unconscious and the glowing eyes as the archetype of the inner watcher, a part of the self that observes thoughts. Jung encouraged Nolde to paint the forest from the perspective of the watcher, turning fear into curiosity. Nolde's later work showed a shift toward brighter colors and a sense of exploration. The partnership demonstrated how Jung's symbolic language could be used in art as well as in personal dreams. The method also works in everyday situations. A person who dreams of losing teeth may recall the feeling of embarrassment. The image of teeth can be linked to the archetype of the mouth, which is the place where words are spoken. The loss of teeth can suggest a fear of losing the ability to speak truthfully. By connecting the image to a current situation, such as a conflict at work, the dream may point to a need to speak up or to listen more carefully. A different everyday case involves a dream about a river that flows backward. The dreamer writes down the scene, notes the feeling of confusion, and sees the river as a symbol of life's flow. The backward motion can be linked to the archetype of the reversal, a sign that something in life is moving in the wrong direction. The dream may be urging the dreamer to reevaluate a habit that feels stuck, such as an unhealthy relationship or a job that no longer brings joy. The final step is to decide on a small change, like setting a boundary or looking for a new opportunity. Modern interpretations of Jung's dream method keep the core steps but add tools such as dream journals that can be stored on a phone. Some therapists use a simple worksheet that follows the 6 steps. Others combine Jung's ideas with modern neuroscience, noting that the brain's default mode network is active during dreaming, and that symbolic images may help the brain sort emotions. Even with new technology, the calm practice of writing, feeling, and linking to archetypes remains central. Jung's own words often appear in discussions of dream work. He wrote, "Dreams are the guiding messages of the unconscious." He also said, "The symbol is the language of the soul, and the soul speaks in images." These quotes remind the listener that dreams are not random nonsense, but a form of communication that can be understood with patience. In summary, the method begins with a quick note of the dream, moves through feeling, image, personal link, archetype guide, and practical step. The recurring school dream shows how a simple image can point to pressure and a possible solution. The vivid travel dream shows how a dramatic scene can highlight change and a way forward. Counterarguments remind that interpretation can feel personal and that archetypes can seem vague, but Jung's own guidance on feeling as a test helps keep the work grounded. Historical anecdotes about a royal's broken crown and a painter's dark forest give real examples of the method in action. Modern tools keep the steps clear and useful. By treating each dream as a short story that uses symbols, anyone can learn to listen to the quiet voice that comes from the deeper part of the mind. Synchronicity is a word that Carl Jung used to point to events that line up in a way that feels full of meaning, even though there is no clear cause and effect link between them. The idea is that the inner world of thoughts, feelings, and symbols can sometimes line up with the outer world of events, creating a bridge that feels more than random chance. In this part of the video, the story of synchronicity will be told through everyday moments, historic notes, and the thoughts of the people who first spoke about it. The goal is to let the listener see how the concept works, why some people accept it, and why others stay skeptical. One common scene that many people can picture is the moment when a person thinks of an old friend, then the phone rings and the friend is on the line. Imagine a teacher who has not spoken to a college roommate for 10 years. While grading papers, the teacher suddenly remembers a joke they shared. The memory brings a smile, and a few minutes later the phone buzzes. The call is from that very roommate, who says, "I was just thinking about you too." The timing feels striking. The teacher may feel that the thought and the call are linked in a deeper way, as if the mind reached out and found the friend. Jung would call that a meaningful coincidence, a synchronicity, because the inner thought and the outer event match in a way that feels purposeful. A second everyday example can be found in a kitchen. A student is stuck on a research paper about renewable energy. The student reads an article, then feels frustrated because the solution seems far away. Later, while walking through a park, the student spots a small booklet lying on a bench. The cover shows a picture of a wind turbine. Inside, a short essay explains a cheap way to build a small turbine at home. The student flips through the pages, finds the exact tip needed, and feels that the book arrived at just the right moment. The inner need for a solution and the outer appearance of a helpful text line up in a way that feels more than coincidence. These two scenes illustrate the core of Jung's idea. He did not claim that thoughts can push objects across space, but he suggested that there may be a pattern that links mind and world beyond ordinary cause. The pattern is not a law of physics, but a kind of symbolic resonance. Jung called the deeper field that holds such patterns the collective unconscious. It is a shared layer of images and symbols that all humans inherit. When a personal feeling taps into a symbol that lives in that shared layer, the symbol can appear in the outer world, creating a synchronicity. The first historical story that Jung told involved a scarab beetle. In 1913, a patient named Sabina Spurain was in therapy with Jung. She was describing a dream about a golden scarab that flew over a field. While she spoke, a real beetle landed on the windowsill of the consulting room. The beetle was a scarab, exactly the one she had just spoken about. Jung wrote, "The scarab appeared at the very moment that the patient spoke of it, and the coincidence was felt as a striking example of the link between inner image and outer fact." Jung saw this as a sign that the patient's inner world had reached out and found a matching object in the outer world. He used the incident to show that the psyche can sometimes speak through symbols that appear in reality. A second anecdote comes from a later case that Jung called the scarab of the unconscious. A man named Wilhelm was in therapy for anxiety. He kept dreaming of a large red rose that opened in a dark garden. One evening, while walking home, Wilhelm passed a florist's shop that displayed a single red rose in a glass case. The shopkeeper noticed Wilhelm's stare, asked if he liked the flower, and said the rose had just been placed there that morning. Wilhelm felt a chill, as if the rose in the shop were the same rose from his dream. He later wrote, "The rose appeared at the moment my unconscious was looking for it, and the experience gave me a feeling of being understood by something beyond my own mind." Jung recorded the episode as proof that the unconscious can reach out and find a matching sign in the world. These stories are not the only places where synchronicity shows up. Jung also gave a famous example involving a patient who was working on a complex mathematical problem. The patient described a dream in which a Roman coin fell from a table and rolled across the floor, landing on a specific number. The next day, the patient found a coin of the same type on the floor of his office, exactly where the dream had placed it. Jung wrote, "The coincidence is striking because the coin appeared in the exact place and with the exact detail that the patient had imagined." The case helped Jung shape his idea that the psyche can sometimes speak through symbols that appear in the outer world. Jung's theory of synchronicity rests on three main ideas. First, there must be a meaningful connection between the inner event, a thought, a dream, an emotion, and the outer event, a real occurrence. Second, the connection cannot be explained by ordinary cause and effect. Third, the meaning comes from the symbolic content of the inner event, not from a simple logical link. When these 3 points line up, Jung called the event a synchronicity. Many people find these ideas attractive because they seem to give a sense of order to random life. The notion that the world can respond to inner feelings can be comforting. It also fits well with the broader view that humans share a deep pool of images, called the collective unconscious. The scarab, the rose, the coin, and the wind turbine booklet all carry symbolic weight that is not limited to one person. The scarab, for example, has long represented rebirth in Egyptian culture. The rose often stands for love or hidden truth. When a personal feeling meets such a symbol, the meeting can feel like a message from a larger mind. However, not everyone accepts synchronicity as a real phenomenon. One common criticism is that people are naturally good at seeing patterns, even when none exist. This is called pattern-seeking bias. The mind likes to connect events that happen close together in time, especially if the events have emotional weight. In the example of the old friend, a person may simply notice the call because they were already thinking about the friend. If the call had not happened, the thought would have faded, and the person would not remember the moment. The brain therefore selects the moments that fit, while ignoring the many times a thought does not lead to an event. Critics argue that synchronicity can be explained by this bias, without needing a special link between mind and world. A second counterargument comes from the field of statistics. Random events can line up in surprising ways simply because of probability. If a person has many thoughts each day, and many events happen each day, some of those thoughts and events will line up by chance. The more people look for synchronicities, the more likely they are to find them. Critics say that Jung's examples, such as the scarab beetle, are striking because they are rare, but the rarity is amplified by the story that is told after the fact. In a large enough sample of therapy sessions, a few coincidences are bound to happen. The stories become memorable, while the many non-events disappear. From this view, synchronicity is not a special bridge, but a statistical artifact. Both sides agree that the experience feels real to the person involved. The feeling of being part of something larger can have a strong emotional impact. Jung believed that this impact can be used in therapy. When a patient notices a synchronicity, it can point to a hidden part of the psyche that needs attention. The therapist can ask the patient what the symbol means to them, and the conversation can open new paths for understanding. In modern therapy, some clinicians still use this idea, especially in approaches that value personal meaning over strict scientific analysis. In everyday life, synchronicity can be seen in many simple ways. A person who worries about a decision may later see a billboard that repeats the same phrase they were mulling over. The billboard can feel like a sign that the decision is right. Another example is a musician who writes a song about a distant city, then receives a postcard from a friend who lives there, describing the exact street mentioned in the lyrics. The coincidence can spark a feeling that the song is tapping into a shared reality. These moments can also be linked to modern ideas about the internet and information flow. In a world where data travels fast, the chance of seeing a relevant meme or article right after a personal thought is higher. Some people argue that what Jung called synchronicity may now be explained by the speed of digital networks. Yet others feel that the feeling of meaning does not disappear, even if the mechanism changes. The inner sense that a sign has arrived remains. To understand how synchronicity fits with Jung's larger theory, it helps to recall the idea of the collective unconscious. Jung wrote that the collective unconscious is a deep layer of the mind that stores universal symbols, or archetypes. Archetypes are patterns of meaning that appear in myths, dreams, and art across cultures. The scarab, the rose, the coin, the wind turbine are all examples of symbols that can carry archetypal weight. When a personal feeling touches one of these symbols, the symbol can surface in the outer world, creating a synchronicity. Jung summed up the link by saying, "Coincidence is not accidental, but expresses the underlying order of the psyche." This quote shows how he saw the event as a window into the hidden order. Modern thinkers have taken Jung's idea in new directions. Some neuroscientists suggest that the brain's predictive coding system may create a sense of meaning when an expected pattern appears. When a person thinks of a friend, the brain becomes more alert to cues related to that friend, making a call seem more significant. Others, like the philosopher David Bohm, have spoken about an implicate order, a deeper level of reality where everything is connected. Bohm's view echoes Jung's idea that there is an unseen web linking mind and matter. In popular culture, the term synchronicity appears in movies, books, and even video games, often as a plot device that hints at hidden connections. Even if the scientific community remains cautious, the concept still offers a useful lens for looking at life. It invites people to pause and ask, what does this moment mean for me? Rather than dismissing a coincidence as random, the synchronicity view encourages reflection on personal values and hidden feelings. In therapy, a clinician might note, the patient noticed a book about forgiveness on the same day they felt guilty. The book may be a symbol that the unconscious is urging them to let go. This approach does not require belief in a mystical force, only a willingness to explore meaning. A final analogy can help clarify the idea. Think of the mind as a radio that tunes into different stations. The inner thought is a frequency that the radio is trying to catch. The outer world is full of many stations broadcasting at once. When the radio happens to land on a station that is playing a song that matches the inner feeling, the listener feels a sense of connection. The match does not mean the radio caused the song, but that the right frequency was found at the right time. Synchronicity is like that moment when the inner frequency and the outer broadcast line up. To bring the discussion full circle, the story of synchronicity can be told in three parts. First, the everyday moments that show how thoughts and events can meet in a way that feels meaningful. Second, the historic cases that Jung recorded, such as the scarab beetle and the rose in the shop, which illustrate how the idea was formed. Third, the arguments that both support and challenge the concept, from pattern-seeking bias to statistical chance. Throughout, the thread that ties everything together is the collective unconscious, the shared pool of symbols that can turn a random event into a meaningful sign. Jung's own words capture the feeling best. He wrote, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality, the ever-present reality of which we are only now becoming aware." He also said, When the inner and outer world meet in a meaningful way, the experience can open a doorway to deeper understanding. These quotes remind the listener that the idea is not about proving a hidden law, but about opening a space for personal insight. In the end, whether one sees synchronicity as a genuine bridge between mind and world, or as a clever trick of the brain, the experience remains powerful. It can guide a person toward a new thought, help a therapist see a hidden pattern, or simply bring a smile when a coincidence feels just right. The concept invites a calm pause. Carl Jung saw religion as a deep need that comes from the mind itself. He believed that every human carries a part of the mind that holds images and ideas shared by all people. He called this shared layer the collective unconscious. In the collective unconscious, there are patterns that repeat across cultures. He named those patterns archetypes. Archetypes are like old pictures that the mind can draw without being taught. They appear in myths, dreams, and religious symbols. Jung said that when a person meets a religious symbol, the mind reacts because the symbol fits an archetype that lives inside the collective unconscious. Jung wrote, "Religion is a function of the psyche, not a function of society." He meant that religion first grows inside the mind, then spreads outward. This view helps to explain why people feel a pull toward prayer, worship, or meditation even when they are alone. The pull is not only a habit learned from others. It is a response of the inner world. One everyday example is a community ritual, such as a Sunday service. In a church service, people sing together, listen to a story, and share a meal. The group feels a sense of belonging. The ritual also gives each person a chance to see a picture of the divine that matches an archetype. The archetype of the wise old guide, for instance, can appear in the figure of a pastor or a saint. When the group repeats the same words and songs, the mind receives the same pattern again and again. The pattern feels safe and familiar. The safety comes from the mind's own need for order. A second example is a personal prayer habit. A person may kneel at night and speak quietly to a higher power. The words may be simple. "Help me, please." Even if no one else hears the words, the mind still reacts. The act of kneeling creates a feeling of humility. The words create a picture of a caring presence. Both the posture and the words fit archetypal images of surrender and protection. The mind receives those images and feels a calm that is not tied to any outside crowd. Jung did not say that society has no role. He agreed that groups help keep the images alive. He also said that the images exist first, inside each person. That is why people can feel religious, even when they are far from a church or a temple. The inner images can appear in dreams, in art, or in a sudden feeling of awe while looking at a mountain. Some thinkers argue that religion is only a social tool. One argument says that religion began as a way to keep groups together. When early humans needed to hunt or gather, they needed rules and stories that made everyone act as one. The argument says that the stories of gods are just ways to teach right and wrong. The argument also says that when the group breaks apart, the religion loses power. In this view, the mind does not need religion on its own. It only follows what the group tells it to do. A second social argument says that religion is a way to control power. Leaders can use the idea of a higher power to tell people what to do. The argument points to historic examples where kings claimed divine right. The claim says that the feeling of awe comes from fear of punishment, not from a deep inner picture. In this view, the mind only reacts because the leader says so, not because the mind has an inner need. Jung answered these social arguments by pointing to the many cases where people feel religious even when they are alone. He also pointed to the fact that similar symbols appear in cultures that never met. He used the I Ching, an ancient Chinese divination book, as a key example. In 1913, Jung received a copy of the I Ching from a German friend. He studied the book and wrote that the symbols in the I Ching matched images that he had seen in his own dreams. He said the book seemed to speak to a part of his mind that was not learned from his culture. He wrote, "The I Ching opens a door to the collective unconscious." By using a Chinese text, Jung showed that the same inner images can appear far from the Western Church. Another historical anecdote comes from Jung's lectures on Christian symbols in the 1930s. He gave a series of talks at the University of Zurich about the cross, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. He explained that the cross is not only a historical tool of execution. In the mind, the cross stands for the archetype of sacrifice and renewal. He pointed to the story of the wounded healer, an image that appears in many myths. He said, "The cross is the meeting point of the wounded and the healed." The audience heard how a single symbol could hold many layers of meaning, some that come from the collective unconscious and some that are taught by the church. Jung's link between archetypes and the collective unconscious helps to explain why the same symbols appear in many religions. The image of a mother who gives life appears as Isis in Egypt, as Mary in Christianity, and as Kuan Yin in Buddhism. The image of a wise old man appears as Odin, as the Buddha, and as the hermit in many folk tales. Jung said that these repeated images are not copied from one culture to another. They are drawn from the same inner source. The inner source is the collective unconscious. When Jung talked about the collective unconscious, he also used the term psychic energy. He meant that the mind has a kind of force that moves images around. This force can push a person toward a ritual, a prayer, or a meditation. The force does not care about the rules of society. It cares about balance inside the mind. When the mind feels out of balance, the force may push a person to seek a symbol that restores balance. A person may turn to a candle, a statue, or a prayer to feel whole again. The inner push is what Jung called a compensation. It means that the mind tries to fill a missing piece with an image that fits an archetype. A modern example can be seen in the way people use meditation apps. Many people sit alone with a phone that plays a soft voice. The voice may say, "You are safe. You are whole." Even though the app is a product of technology, the words still match the archetype of the caring mother. The mind receives the image and feels calm. The same process works with a church hymn, a prayer bead, or a mantra. The outer form changes, but the inner need stays the same. Another modern example is the rise of online prayer groups. People log into a video call and pray together. They cannot touch each other, but they still share the same words and gestures. The shared words act as a bridge that links each mind to the same archetype of community. The bridge is built inside the mind, not by the screen. The screen only makes it easier to see the same picture at the same time. Jung also warned that when the outer form of religion becomes too rigid, it can block the inner images. He said that a strict set of rules can stop the mind from seeing new symbols that might be needed. He called this the tyranny of the conscious mind. When a person follows a rule without feeling the inner picture, the mind may feel empty. The emptiness can lead to doubt or rebellion. Jung believed that the healthiest religion is one that lets the inner images speak, while still giving a safe structure. To show how this works, Jung gave the story of a monk who stopped chanting because the words no longer felt true. The monk felt that the chant was just a sound, not a picture that reached his mind. He left the monastery and later returned after a long walk in the forest. In the forest, he saw a tree that seemed to hold the whole sky. He felt the image of the tree as a symbol of growth and shelter. He began to pray again, but this time he used the image of the tree in his mind. The monk's experience shows how the inner picture can guide the outer practice. Critics who say religion is only a social tool point to the monk's story and say that the monk's change was caused by the community that praised his new way of praying. They argue that the monk needed approval, not an inner image. Jung would reply that the monk's inner image of the tree existed before any other person saw it. The image came from the collective unconscious, not from the monk's peers. Another critique says that the rise of secular societies shows that religion is not needed for the mind. They point to people who live happy lives without any prayer or ritual. Jung would answer that even secular people have inner images that act like archetypes. He would say that a love for music, a love for nature, or a love for art can all be expressions of the same inner need. The need does not disappear. It simply finds a different outward shape. Jung's view also helps to understand why some people feel drawn to new religious movements. When a new group offers a fresh symbol, the mind may see it as a new way to fill a missing picture. The group may use a new myth, a new chant, or a new ritual. The mind welcomes the fresh image because it still fits an archetype. The group's growth is not only because of social pressure, but also because the inner need is being met. In his writings, Jung often quoted the ancient poet Hesiod, who said, "The gods are the same as the souls of men." He used the quote to show that the line between inner and outer is thin. He also quoted the Bible, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Jung said that the words are not only about a person named Jesus, they also point to the inner path that each mind can walk. The quote works as a symbol that fits the archetype of the guide. Jung's work on religion also touched on the idea of the shadow. The shadow is the part of the mind that holds things a person does not want to see. Religion can help bring the shadow into light. A confession, for example, lets a person speak of hidden guilt. By speaking, the mind can see the shadow and work with it. The process can be seen as a meeting between the light side of the mind and the dark side. The meeting can happen in a church, in a meditation hall, or in a quiet room. The key is that the mind uses a symbol confession to deal with the shadow. An example of the shadow in daily life is a person who feels angry at a neighbor but never says it. The person may go to a prayer service and say a prayer for patience. The prayer acts as a safe way to bring the angry feeling into the mind. The mind can then see the anger and let it go. The prayer is not just a social rule. It is a tool the mind uses to work with the shadow. Jung also spoke about the anima and animus, the inner images of the opposite gender. He said that many religious stories show a hero who meets a wise woman or a wise man. The meeting helps the hero become whole. The story is an archetype that lives in the collective unconscious. When a person reads a story about a wise woman, the mind can see its own anima and learn from it. The story works as a mirror for the inner world. In modern therapy, Jungian analysts still use religious symbols to help patients. They may ask a patient to draw a picture of a cross, a mandala, or a tree. The drawing can reveal which archetype is active. The therapist does not force a belief. The therapist simply uses the symbol as a window into the mind. The practice shows how religion can be a tool for inner work, not just a social rule. To sum up, Jung saw religion as a need that comes from the mind. He said the need is linked to the collective unconscious and to archetypes. He gave many examples, from community rituals to personal prayer, to show how the mind meets the need. He also shared stories from his own life, such as his study of the I Ching and his lectures on Christian symbols. He answered social arguments by pointing to inner images that appear across cultures. He showed that symbols can help the mind work with the shadow, the anima, and other inner parts. Modern life still shows the same pattern. Whether a person kneels in a church, lights a candle at home, or clicks a meditation app, the mind is using a symbol that fits an archetype. The symbol gives a sense of balance, meaning, and connection. Jung's view helps to understand why religion stays important for many people, even in a world The conversation about Carl Jung's philosophy often turns into a quiet debate that feels like two friends sitting at a kitchen table. One friend points out that Jung's ideas sometimes look like a recipe without measurements. The other friend reminds the first that the same recipe can still make a good meal if the cook knows the flavors. This script follows that pattern, laying out the main criticisms, the ways people push back, and the lasting marks Jung left on art and therapy. The first criticism that many scholars raise is that Jung's work lacks scientific testing. In modern psychology, a theory is usually checked by experiments that can be repeated. Jung's concepts, such as the collective unconscious and archetypes, are hard to test in a lab. Critics say that, because these ideas cannot be measured, they belong more to poetry than to science. They note that Jung often used case studies and personal reflections instead of controlled studies. In a 1970 article, the psychologist Paul R. McHugh wrote, "Jung's theories are not falsifiable, and therefore they do not meet the standards of scientific psychology." This statement captures the core of the scientific objection. A second criticism focuses on cultural bias. Jung grew up in early 20th century Europe, a time when many thinkers believed that Western myths held universal meaning. He claimed that symbols like the mother, the hero, or the wise old man appear in every culture because they come from a shared unconscious. Critics argue that this view ignores the rich variety of non-Western symbols and imposes a Eurocentric lens on other peoples. Anthropologist Margaret Mead once said, "To assume that a single set of symbols fits all peoples is to flatten the world into a single story." Jung's own writings sometimes reflect this bias, as he described the primitive mind in terms that sound dated today. A third line of critique looks at Jung's method of interpretation. He often used what he called proactive imagination, a process where a person lets images rise in the mind and then talks with them. Critics claim that this method can lead to confirmation bias, where the analyst sees what they expect to see. They worry that the therapist's own ideas can shape the patient's images, turning the session into a projection of the therapist's beliefs rather than a neutral exploration. These criticisms form a solid wall that some people see as blocking Jung's influence. Yet, two strong counterarguments stand on the other side of that wall. The first counterargument says that Jung's ideas have shaped modern art in a way that no lab test can capture. Artists like Anselm Kiefer, Louise Bourgeois, and even the filmmaker David Lynch have spoken about using Jungian archetypes to guide their work. Kiefer once wrote, "The shadow and the light in my paintings are not just symbols. They are the deep patterns that Jung called archetypes. When an artist taps into those deep patterns, the result can move many people, even if the pattern cannot be measured in a test tube." The power of a painting or a film to touch the soul shows that Jung's concepts have a kind of practical truth that lives outside the laboratory. The second counter-argument points to the field of psychotherapy, where Jung's ideas have been turned into concrete tools. Modern approaches such as art therapy, dream analysis, and depth psychology all trace a line back to Jung. In a 1995 interview, the therapist James Hillman said, "If we ignore the symbolic world, we lose a map that many patients need to find their way out of pain." Hillman's view reflects a broader belief that the symbolic language Jung described helps people make sense of their inner lives. Even if the symbols cannot be counted, they can guide a therapist in helping a client move from confusion to clarity. This practical use in therapy is a strong defense against the claim that Jung's work is only poetic. Two historical anecdotes help illustrate why the debate still matters. The first anecdote is the famous split between Jung and Sigmund Freud. In the early 1900s, Freud and Jung were close collaborators. Freud saw Jung as the heir to his psychoanalytic movement, and Jung admired Freud's insights into the unconscious. However, Their friendship broke when Jung began to stress the role of myth, religion, and the collective unconscious, ideas that Freud dismissed as mystical. In a letter dated July 1913, Jung wrote, "I cannot accept a theory that reduces the soul to a mere byproduct of sexual drives." Freud responded with a sharp note, calling Jung's turn betrayal of scientific rigor. Their split created two separate schools of thought that still shape psychology today. The second anecdote comes from the rise of modern therapy schools that cite Jung's work. In the 1970s, a group of therapists in the United States formed the Association for Transpersonal Psychology. They explicitly built their training on Jung's ideas about the self, the shadow, and the process of individuation. Individuation, a term Jung used to describe the journey of becoming a whole person, became a core goal in many of these programs. One founder, Michael Washburn, said, "The path to wholeness is not a straight line. It is a winding road that mirrors the myths Jung studied." These schools show that Jung's concepts have been adapted into structured curricula, not just loose ideas. Connecting back to earlier sections on individuation and archetypes, it is clear that the criticisms often target the same ideas that were highlighted as strengths. The notion of individuation was presented as a personal growth path that moves a person from a fragmented self to a more integrated whole. Critics argue that the concept is vague and cannot be measured. Yet, therapists who work with clients report that focusing on individuation helps people set goals, notice recurring patterns, and feel more balanced. When a client describes feeling stuck in the same role and then discovers a new inner voice, that shift can be seen as a small step toward individuation, even if it cannot be plotted on a graph. Archetypes, another key idea, were described earlier as universal symbols that appear in myths, dreams, and art. Critics say that archetypes are just cultural stereotypes. However, when a therapist notices that a patient keeps dreaming of a wise old man, the therapist can use that image to explore the patient's sense of guidance. The therapist might ask, "What does this old man represent for you?" The patient may discover a hidden belief about needing permission before acting. That insight can lead to real change in the patient's life. In this way, archetypes become tools for self-knowledge, not just abstract theories. To illustrate the recipe analogy, imagine a baker who wants to make a loaf of bread, but does not have a scale. The baker knows that flour, water, yeast, and salt are needed, but the exact amounts are not written down. The baker watches the dough, feels its texture, and adjusts the ingredients by eye. The result can be a delicious loaf if the baker has experience. Jung's ideas work in a similar way. They give a set of ingredients, symbols, myths, the shadow, the self, but they do not prescribe exact measurements. The therapist or the artist must sense the right balance for each person or each work of art. The story in one language analogy works in a similar fashion. Think of a tale told only in English to an audience that speaks many languages. The story may miss nuances that only other languages can express. Yet, the core plot can still move the audience, because the basic human emotions, love, loss, hope, are shared. Jung's archetypes are like that core plot. They may miss cultural specifics, but they tap into feelings that many people recognize. Critics point out the missing details, but supporters argue that the shared core is what makes the ideas powerful. Another everyday example helps to see why Jung's legacy matters. A college student studying literature reads a novel that features a hero's journey. The student notices that the hero faces a dark forest, meets a wise mentor, and returns home changed. By naming these steps as the hero archetype, the student can discuss the story with classmates in a clear way. This naming does not prove that every culture has the same hero, but it gives a useful shortcut for conversation. In therapy, a similar shortcut can help a client label a feeling as the shadow, and then work with it. A second example comes from modern design. A graphic designer creates a logo that uses a circle, a triangle, and a line. The designer says the circle represents wholeness, the triangle stands for aspiration, and the line shows a path. These are archetypal shapes that many people find meaningful. When a brand uses such symbols, it can connect with customers on a deeper level. The designer's choice reflects Jung's idea that certain images carry shared meaning, even if the exact origin of that meaning is hard to test. The discussion of scientific testing also needs a gentle clarification. Science often looks for cause and effect that can be repeated. Jung's work deals with inner experiences that are unique to each person. When a researcher tries to put a dream on a scale, the result can feel forced. Some psychologists have tried to create questionnaires that ask people how often they see archetypal images. These tools have produced mixed results, leading many to conclude that the method is not yet reliable. This does not mean the ideas are false. It simply means that the tools we have now may not be the right ones. Cultural bias is another serious point. Jung wrote many of his early works after traveling to Africa, India, and the Americas. He collected myths and tried to find common threads. In a letter to his colleague, he wrote, "I see the same pattern of the mother goddess in the Nile, the Andes, and the Siberian steppe. Later scholars have shown that some of those patterns were interpreted through a Western lens. For example, the Great Mother motif may look similar, but the cultural roles of mother figures differ greatly. This observation does not erase the fact that some symbols do repeat, but it asks us to be careful about assuming they are identical." Defending Jung against the bias claim, one can point to the work of contemporary scholars who have expanded the archetype list to include non-Western symbols. A researcher named Marie-Louise von Franz studied Chinese myths and found archetypal themes that matched Jung's ideas, yet she also highlighted the unique cultural flavor of each story. She wrote, "The dragon in Chinese legend is not the same as the dragon in European tales, but both speak to the deep image of a powerful force." This shows that Jung's framework can be broadened, not that it is locked into one culture. The influence on art remains a vivid part of Jung's legacy. In the early 1950s, the painter Jackson Pollock met Jung in a Zurich clinic. Pollock described his paintings as a way to let the unconscious speak. Jung replied, "Your canvases are like dreams made of paint." This meeting inspired many abstract expressionists to view their work as a dialogue with the inner world. Even today, art therapy programs teach students to use Jungian symbols to help clients express feelings that are hard to put into words. The therapist may ask a client to draw a shadow figure, and the drawing can reveal hidden fears. In therapy, Jung's ideas also appear in the practice of dream analysis. A therapist might ask a client to keep a dream journal and then look for recurring symbols, such as water representing the unconscious or a house representing the self. By tracing these symbols, the therapist can help the client see patterns in their waking life. While this method does not follow the strict experimental rules of modern neuroscience, many clients report that it gives them a clearer view of their inner world. The therapist's skill lies in guiding the client, not in measuring the dream's chemical composition. Modern therapy schools that cite Jung include the Jungian analytical psychology movement, the existential humanistic approach, and the depth psychology tradition. These schools teach students to work with the concept of the self as a center that integrates many parts of the personality. They also teach the use of transference, a term that describes how a client projects feelings onto the therapist, similar to how a story can be told in a single language that everyone understands. By recognizing transference, the therapist can help the client separate past feelings from present reality. A recent example comes from a community counseling center in Toronto. The center runs a program called Mythic Paths, where participants explore personal stories using Jungian archetypes. One participant described feeling stuck in a prison archetype, and through group discussion, she found a way to rewrite her story as a traveler moving toward freedom. The program's director noted, "Even if the archetype is a metaphor, it gives people a language to talk about change." This anecdote shows that Jung's ideas can be turned into practical tools that help people grow. Critics also argue that Jung's writing style is dense and full of metaphor, making it hard for ordinary readers. They point out that his books often read like a diary of symbols rather than a clear guide. However, supporters say that the poetic style is intentional because Jung wanted to reach the part of the mind that does not think in. The narrator begins by reminding the listener that Jung's ideas are not locked inside a dusty book. They can be used in the small moments of a day, in the way a person writes down a dream, or the way a person watches a pattern repeat at work. The key idea is that each person carries a set of inner images called archetypes that shape feelings and actions. When a person pays attention to those images, the person can move toward what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a whole self, not just a collection of habits. At the same time, Jung warned that every person also has a shadow, the parts that are hidden, denied, or judged as bad. By seeing the shadow, a person can stop being surprised by it later. A simple way to start is to keep a dream journal. Each night, before sleep, the person writes down any fragment of a dream that can be recalled. The act of writing makes the unconscious content visible. Over weeks, the person may notice a symbol that appears again, such as a bridge, a storm, or a locked door. Jung said that repeated symbols are messages from the unconscious that point to a personal theme. The person can then ask, "What in my waking life feels like a bridge that I cannot cross?" The answer may be a fear of asking for a promotion, a fear of sharing a new idea, or a fear of a relationship ending. By naming the symbol, the person brings the hidden feeling into light, and the shadow loses its power to surprise. Consider a workplace conflict. Maria works in a design team. She feels that her ideas are constantly ignored, and she becomes angry when a colleague, Tom, takes credit for her sketches. In a dream, Maria sees herself standing in a dark forest, trying to find a path but hearing a wolf howl. The wolf can be read as a shadow image, a part of herself that feels threatened and aggressive. By looking at the dream, Maria can see that the anger is not only about Tom, but also about a part of herself that fears being seen as weak. She can then try a new approach. Instead of confronting Tom directly, she can ask for a joint presentation, sharing the credit. By doing so, she acknowledges the shadow feeling of fear, and the conflict eases. The change is not magic, but a small shift that comes from listening to the inner picture. A second example comes from a creative project. Alex is a musician who wants to write a new song but feels stuck. He starts a dream journal and writes down a recurring image of a cracked vase that still holds water. The cracked vase can be read as an archetype of the wounded healer, a symbol of something broken that still serves a purpose. Alex sees that his fear of being imperfect is the real block. He decides to record a rough version of the song, letting the cracks show. The final piece has a raw edge that listeners love. By using the dream image, Alex moves past the fear and lets the creative flow. These two stories show how Jung's ideas can be turned into daily habits. The practice of journaling, of looking for patterns, and of naming the shadow can make the abstract ideas feel concrete. The listener can try it tonight, with a notebook and a pen, and see what images rise from the night. Not everyone thinks the method works. One common counterargument says that Jung's archetypes are too vague to be useful. Critics point out that archetype can mean anything, so the term becomes a catch-all that does not tell a person what to do. They argue that a therapist who tells a client to look for the hero within may be offering a poetic suggestion, but no clear plan. In response, Jung himself warned that the symbols must be linked to the person's own life. The process is not about applying a universal label, but about finding a personal story that fits the symbol. The dream journal forces that personal link, because the symbols are recorded in the context of the person's own words. A second counterargument says that Jung's ideas belong to a different era, when people believed in myths and collective unconscious in a way that modern science does not support. Skeptics claim that the unconscious is a vague concept that cannot be measured, so any advice based on it is just guesswork. They suggest that a more practical approach, such as cognitive behavioral techniques, gives clear steps and measurable results. In reply, the listener can note that Jung never claimed his method was a quick fix. He saw individuation as a lifelong journey, much like learning a new skill. The value lies in the depth of self-knowledge, not in a rapid symptom reduction. For people who feel that their lives are ruled by hidden patterns, the deeper work can bring lasting change, even if it is slower. Historical anecdotes help to show how modern therapists have taken Jung's ideas and turned them into tools. One story is about James Hillman, a psychologist who founded archetypal psychology in the 1970s. Hillman took Jung's idea of archetypes and used it to help clients see their problems as stories rather than failures. He told a client who felt stuck in a job that the client might be living the soldier story where duty overrides personal desire. By recognizing the story, the client could rewrite it, perhaps becoming a craftsman who builds something meaningful. Hillman's work shows how the abstract idea of an archetype can become a concrete narrative that a person can work with. Another anecdote involves Marie-Louise von Franz, a close student of Jung who spent decades studying dreams. In the 1950s, von Franz worked with a therapist in Switzerland who used dream journals to treat a young man with severe anxiety. The therapist asked the patient to write every dream and then to draw the most vivid image. Over months, the patient's drawings revealed a recurring image of a locked gate. The therapist linked the gate to the patient's feeling of being blocked from expressing his true self. By gently exploring the gate in therapy, the patient learned to open it in real life, speaking up in class and joining a community group. Von Franz later wrote that the gate was a symbol of the personal shadow, and that the patient's willingness to face it reduced his anxiety. This story shows that the simple act of writing and drawing can turn Jung's theory into a practical step. A popular film that reflects Jung's archetypes is The Lion King. The story follows Simba, a young lion who must leave his kingdom after his father's death, wander through a period of doubt, and finally return to claim his place. The characters in the film fit clear archetypes. Simba is the hero, Mufasa is the wise old man, Scar is the shadow, and Rafiki is the mentor. The film shows how the hero must face the shadow inside himself, the fear of being unworthy before he can step into his role. Viewers can see the pattern and think about their own lonely moments where a hidden fear blocks a needed step. The film makes the archetype language vivid, and it helps the audience understand that the same pattern repeats in many lives. When the listener thinks about applying Jung today, it helps to remember the two core ideas that have already been discussed: individuation and the shadow. Individuation is the path of becoming a whole person, not just a sum of roles. The shadow is the part that hides, often because it feels shameful or dangerous. By using a dream journal, by noticing repeated symbols, and by naming the shadow, a person can move a little farther on the path of individuation. The process is slow, but each small step adds up. A practical tip is to set a simple routine. Each morning, spend 5 minutes looking at the previous night's journal entry. Ask 3 questions. What image stands out? What feeling does that image bring up? How might that feeling be showing up today? Write the answers in a few short sentences. Over a month, patterns will appear. Maybe the same animal repeats, or the same type of weather. Each pattern points to a theme the unconscious is trying to teach. Another tip is to use the shadow check in daily life. When a strong reaction arises, anger, jealousy, embarrassment, pause and ask, what part of me does this reaction protect? The answer often reveals a hidden belief, such as, I must never look weak. By naming that belief, the person can decide whether it still serves a purpose. If it does not, the person can try a new response, such as asking for help instead of refusing it. This small experiment can turn an abstract shadow idea into a concrete choice. In a corporate setting, a manager named Lena used Jung's ideas to improve team dynamics. She asked each team member to write a short story about a time they felt most alive at work. The stories revealed common archetypes. Some spoke of a true guardian role, protecting the project. Others spoke of a curator role, building new ideas. By sharing the stories, the team saw each other's strengths and hidden fears. When a conflict arose over resource allocation, the team remembered the guardian story and realized that the disagreement was about protecting a valued part of the project, not about personal power. The team resolved the issue by assigning a guardian to watch the resources while the creator led the new design. The anecdote shows that Jung's concepts can help people see beyond surface arguments. A creative group of artists in Berlin used Jung's shadow concept to break a creative block. They met once a week, each bringing a piece of work they felt was unfinished. They each described the part of the work they feared showing. By naming the fear, the group could offer support, turning the shadow into a shared story. The artists reported that their work became richer after the process. The story illustrates that the shadow is not only a personal issue, but can be explored in a community setting. Critics who say Jung is too abstract may point to the language of the collective unconscious. They argue that collective unconscious sounds like a mystical idea, not a tool for daily life. In response, the listener can note that Jung used the term to describe patterns that appear across cultures, such as the mother figure, the trickster, or the flood story. When a person sees a similar pattern in a personal dream, the term becomes a bridge between the personal and the universal. It does not require belief in a mystical realm, only an awareness that some images repeat because they tap into shared human experience. Another criticism is that Jung's method may lead to over-interpretation, where every detail is given a deep meaning that may not be there. The risk is to create stories that distract from real problems. The counterpoint is that Jung himself warned against forcing meaning. He taught that the image must feel alive to the person, not just be fitted into a theory. The journal practice respects that rule by letting the person decide what feels true. If a symbol feels empty, it can be set aside. The method stays flexible. The film Inception also offers a modern illustration of Jungian ideas. The main character, Cobb, works with dreams to extract secrets. The film shows how a recurring image, a spinning top, serves as a personal symbol for reality and doubt. Cobb's struggle with his own shadow, guilt over his wife's death, drives the plot. The film's layered dreams act like a visual journal, each level revealing deeper parts of the mind. Viewers can see how a personal symbol can guide decisions, much like a dream journal can guide a real person. To bring the ideas home, the narrator asks the listener to imagine a simple scene. A person sits at a kitchen table, a notebook open, a pen in hand. The night's dream is a broken mirror that still reflects a bright sky. The broken mirror is a shadow image, a part of the self that feels cracked, yet the sky shows hope. The person writes, "I feel broken, but I still see hope." By writing this, the person acknowledges the shadow and also sees a path toward wholeness. This tiny act mirrors the larger journey of individuation. In sum, Jung's philosophy can be used in daily life by keeping a dream journal, looking for repeating symbols, naming the shadow when strong emotions arise, and sharing personal stories to see archetypal patterns. The approach is not a quick fix, but a steady practice that can help a person understand hidden motives, improve relationships, and unlock creativity. Historical therapists like James Hillman and Marie-Louise von Franz showed how the ideas can become practical tools, and modern films like The Lion King and Inception make the archetypes easy to see. While some critics say the concepts are too vague or too mystical, the practice of writing, reflecting, and naming keeps the ideas grounded in personal experience. By turning abstract symbols into concrete notes, each person can take a small step toward becoming